Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the second session of the second day of Next Innovation Week with a very hot and interesting topic, which is the conversational AI transformation of pharma. And very glad to welcome Sophie Gazelle from MSD. Hi, Sophie, how are you?
Hi, Dario, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Xuan Gui from BMS. Hello, Xuan. Same question to you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Dario? Good to see you, and wish I was in Croatia instead, but this is good enough for now.
Yeah, I agree, but hopefully next year or in at least in the decade, right? And Dr. John Reeves from Conversational Health. Hi, John. Same question. How are you?
All is well here in Toronto. Thanks, Dario, for having us.
Thank you very much. So let's kick off this very interesting and promising session. And first of all, I would like to mention and maybe even open this session with welcome finally to the era of digital transformation, right? But maybe this is even not so appropriate to claim, because when we speak about digital transformation in pharma, we speak about technology like Zoom, like Teams, newsletters, rep-triggered email, webinars, etc. And in my opinion, it's just the dawn of the new era in which we're entering, and part of that is definitely conversational AI, machine learning, etc. So this is the tech which will definitely make the big shift towards this full capacity of digital transformation, and our industry, of course, can take the path like other industries and cases like Disney or CNN, UNICEF, or some other companies who leverage this technology in the most appropriate way. But let's dive deep into the conversation. Also, I encourage everyone to raise questions. If anyone is having any kind of question, please feel free to ask. Our panelists will be glad to answer on that. But before we start the interactive discussion, I would like to pass the stage to John, who can set the stage with some very interesting insights as usual, because conversational health is definitely having state-of-the-art technology when it comes to conversational AI. So John, the stage is yours. Let us know about the latest trends and learnings which you are facing during the COVID time. John?
No, absolutely. So I just want to start off by kind of level setting and getting everyone kind of up to a 101 speed. So, we often get the question, what is conversational AI? So literally, it's just the ability now for you, customers, whether it be consumers, patients, physicians, to interact with brands through a channel whereby you're not speaking to a human, but you're speaking to technology, and that technology now has the ability to understand what you are saying and to respond to that. So literally, just as you have, text or voice conversations with your friends, family, and colleagues, your customers can now have a conversation with your company or your brand. And ultimately, where we're on this journey now is getting to a point where that response feels incredibly human. And then, of course, that brings along all the benefits of a human conversation. So because it is powered by software, there's a huge advantage in that it's available 24/7. And we know that not all customer queries come in between 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Healthcare isn't based on that kind of a time system. Of course, it's incredibly scalable, right? There is no limitation because it's not a human. There is no human constraint. And of course, one of the key things is that any response that is generated out of a conversational AI platform, because you control that content, you can always be as expert as you can make it. And of course, it's consistent and compliant. So that's really important. So net is that, for a pharma brand or a company, it gives you a kind of a unique and new way to engage and support your customers. And, as Dario mentioned, this is probably even more relevant, or certainly is more relevant in this moment, where face-to-face interactions between both your sales force, MSLs, and physicians, but also between physicians and their patients has been, drastically reduced due to COVID. And I think we're seeing the early signs now that this is not going to be coming to an end. I think we have a good year plus where this is definitely going to be in effect, and I think that almost all humans are adapting and finding themselves incredibly comfortable living in this new virtual world. On the next slide, we kind of talk about the context of where this is over the kind of the historical horizons that we've had. So we've been through the web and the app horizons. I was actually, involved in this business back in 1995, 96. That's when I first went into the practice of medicine, and was there when the web became available, and all of a sudden every piece of information that we kind of dreamed of having was at our fingertips, as well as the fingertips of our patients. Of course, that became overwhelming, and we had difficulties in actually finding great information. We went through the app horizon. One of the consistent insights from that was that we were expecting our customers to learn fairly complex information architecture to find the information that they were looking for, right? They would have to learn a new navigation system for every digital property they would go to. And then at the end of that search, you literally got to a big piece of text that you would then have to wade through to find the answer to your question that you were looking for. So that kind of worked then, but doesn't work now, right? Humans are now in this new snackable on-demand world. And so literally as we move into this conversational AI horizon, and as you see as of March 2020, we've got this huge kind of bump up in the interaction or growth of this. In this new world, we're saying you don't have to search for information. You can simply ask for information. So that does a couple things. One, it does give that quick response, but then gives the opportunity for us as brands and companies to carry on a conversation way beyond what the customer has asked us, which is really, really important. We won't spend any time on the data. This deck will be available, but all the data points are kind of showing that humans actually really like working with AI-based solutions as long as that solution is well developed. So let's not kid ourselves. Not all conversational AI solutions are the same. We are early in this new horizon of digital. So let's put that in the context of where we are now, where we were, say for example, 2 years ago, and where we're going to be in 3 and 5 years is really going to see a lot of development of sophistication in these solutions. On the next slide, I think what's super important for us, Dario, is that whether you are consumer, patient, or physician, as you access conversational touchpoints, it's actually an expanding set of touchpoints. And so we're all probably very familiar with web chat. We've seen that, and as we know, that can be deployed on brand.com sites, on MedInfo sites, wherever that may be. But that's also available through messaging apps and mobile. Of course, one of the interesting now new ways you can deploy those conversations is on third-party properties, such as a banner ad on another site, for example, a physician portal, et cetera, et cetera. So what that literally means for a brand is that you can intercept your patients or physicians on their during their digital day on a third-party property. We can't always get our customers to come to us, so why don't we start the conversation where they are? And as long as we know what they're looking for, that conversation can be very contextual and therefore not appear to be a marketing, but more of a self-service model, right? Of course, IVR is I kind of think a rapid growth area. So can we replace those humans with voice solutions? And we're seeing that come through voice devices, Alexa, Google at Home. So those are now going into market. And I think what we're starting to see now is a bit of a growth into this digital human, where really that voice interaction is taking place through a human-like avatar. And in case people haven't seen it, these are becoming incredibly human-like, to some people very scary, to other people not. But it really brings a face and a kind of a personality, a deeper personality to those interactions. So there are certainly some scenarios or use cases with patients where this will be incredibly powerful. On the next slide, Dario. So, in net, I think there are kind of like 3 areas where you should be thinking of where conversational AI can be relevant or beneficial to you. So I think the first one really is, we've all invested a lot in creating digital touch points. I mean, way back in 95, we were building a corporate site. Now every company, and Sophie and Shwan can attest this, has hundreds of digital properties. All of those digital properties have the same constraint that we talked about earlier in most cases, which is they are content-based and require our users to search for information. So how can we take all of those digital properties, or the key ones, the relevant ones, and turn them away from a content exercise to one where a user can simply interact with a bot, ask a question, and have that bot respond and become the guide for them to take them through not only the content on that website, but also the ability to deploy or bring in content from other digital assets that may exist. So that's one, just taking existing digital touchpoints, replace the concept of search and looking for information, and replacing that with a simple ask and find. Of course, that means that all that content that you've created now turns into a conversation, that kind of core theme we talk about. Second one is, of course, the virtualization, right? So wherever we are having human interactions now, human to human. So for example, a physician and sales rep, physician MSL, or the physician doctor, which in many ways we look to influence. How can we virtualize those? And that, of course, does not mean, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, the replacement of those humans, but oftentimes it's really about complementing them, right? So how do we open up actually more conversations for them and support them in their interaction with their customers? Of course, not all physicians, not all patients have the largesse of having a human interaction with a brand. And so this also provides an opportunity for those low C or lower value doctor, no C doctors to actually have a bit of a sales rep or human interaction. Last but not least, of course, then is this concept of voice, right? So this is a net new channel for us. So the ability to be there in the physician's, clinical day at his office through a voice device. It's literally like having an MSL or a sales rep in the office with you and available for you to ask some questions at any point, right? So those are kind of three key areas. And on the last slide, you're going to see that, our clients are taking those concepts and deploying them right across the enterprise, whether it be, clinical trials, the medical affairs side of the business, marketing and sales. There are lots of great use cases. I'm sure we'll talk about those shortly, but suffice to say that those three principles are being applied across all of those. So hopefully that's a bit of a quick intro so that everyone has a little bit of a lay of the land as we dive in deeper into conversational AI.
Thank you, John, for this very insightful opening. Let's move forward to our first pool. I would kindly like to launch the first question to our audience, which is which pharma business unit will obtain the greatest benefit from tapping into the opportunities presented by text voice bots? Please feel free to reply, to answer. We give like 1 minute time and looking forward for the answers. Okay, let's see. 20 seconds to go. Oh, some very interesting results actually. 40% already voted. Let's wait for 50 and I will close the pool and share the results. So 58% patient solutions and support. Who would like to give a comment on that? Very interesting actually.
I'm happy to get started here, Dario. I think, and maybe what's driving this 58% is we're seeing patients increasingly want to use symptom checkers, apps for mental health, etc. So I think what's driving that 58% is the acceptance from patients and users and the increasing use of some of these solutions. One more that I will add into here actually that was not mentioned would also be supply chain. We've seen some good examples in MSD of using supply, bots to inform about the status of inventory or shipments, etc. And they've been rolled out globally. So maybe one more to add to the list in here.
Thank you, Sophie. Anyone else would like to comment these results?
Yeah, sure, Dario. I'll jump in. I think it's not surprising to see this as a first choice. I think, the other choice you might have wanted to put in there, which is, your typical sort of high school question, which is around all of the above, because I think there is value in everything. But it's not surprising to see people go to, I think, patient solutions first, because I think that's automatically where we see these kinds of tools and platforms. And just to make sure that we define this well, I mean, while we talked about conversational AI, I think if you want to simplify it, really what we're talking about is mainly things like chatbots and voice bots, right, as a delivery mechanism for these conversations. And so I think what's important to understand is that when we think about where these types of tools are most utilized right now, the patients are the ones that are seamlessly interacting with them across multiple industries as part of their daily lives, whether it's probably in the past, not so much now, but like calling your airline to change a seat on your flight, or whether it's some other way of interacting with a customer support line. A lot of it's now being driven by conversational AI. So I think the immediate place where people veer to in terms of the value for pharma and healthcare is going to be in the patient solutions and patient support programs, because there's an automatic sort of seamless flow right into what they do in their daily life in other industries as well.
Thank you, Sven. Dr. John?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's really interesting, because that's actually almost in many ways the opposite of what pharma's invested in to date. So I think that, on the surface, yes, you might see a number of consumer patient bots out there. But for us, as we go beyond 20, global pharma clients, the vast majority are investing in conversational AI solutions that are actually cost reduction, right? So they're looking at MedInfo, enterprise solutions that are literally, automating a lot of that inbound touch point. I think it's easier in many ways to look at cost reduction as you move into a new horizon as an easy way to get involved. That said, because the poll is being taken today, I would say that over the last 3 months, we've seen 3 to 6 months, a huge growth now in this patient kind of concept of investing in that. And I think we'll probably talk more about that. But I think that as companies venture into conversational AI, the least expensive, the easiest area to go into is a very simple conversational AI solution for a patient that's deployed on a brand.com, right? There are many things you can do to scale back the difficulty of that or the complexity of that investment, both in terms of time, technology, etc. So it's a great way to get involved in conversational AI early on for companies.
Thank you, John. Let's proceed with the first panel question, which is that there is a trend and need, of course, to align digital and human activities within pharma. Sven, can you maybe share your thoughts and experiences based on this hybrid model, if you can call that as a hybrid model?
Yeah, I think, as we, you called it out at the start, as we start to move into this era where, digital activities and human activities are seamlessly sort of part of our daily lives, whether it's, calling a customer support line or shopping online versus going to the store. And then now in this current pandemic situation, everything's being driven online as well. I think, there's no longer this differentiation between what we do in real life and what we do online anymore, because we've had to shift a lot of our activities one way or the other. And so, in the same way as pharma starts to prepare for this, right now you're seeing this acceleration of an adoption of really starting to shift all the traditional ways we did things to a digital world. You're starting to see that acceleration of the digital trends of starting to make this move for what we used to do in the human face-to-face world to an online world driven through both digital engagements as well as personal engagements driven through digital platforms. So I think that's where you're starting to see this huge move now. The acceleration of this and adoption of this has been a lot driven by the necessity, right? Because we don't have face-to-face interactions anymore. So how prepared are we to really start to move into this world to make it seamless and easy for the patient or healthcare professional to engage with our organization or parts of it that need to support those stakeholders?
Thank you, Sven. Any thoughts from other participants of this panel?
One thing I would add here to Sven's point, I think, we've seen those type of bots and conversational AI be very, get a lot of traction and engagement when they're part of a broader value proposition. So for example, in medical affairs, we have, and John will be familiar with this example, but we rolled out a bot in medical affairs in Canada from our team. And essentially the bot can answer questions about 20 products, yes. But it's also part of a broader platform that, through which you can actually get to a human medical scientific liaison. You can just search for content if you want to. You have an ability to chat. So you're really trying to bring all of this proposition into one place so that you create a nice user experience and no frustration if, for example, the bot can't answer your question. You always have another channel. So bringing the channels together is always proving, more successful than actually bringing a point solution and pushing it forward. And maybe just another thought on the investment from pharma, to John's point earlier. It's natural that pharma will invest more in solutions that are customer facing. I think actually it's a good learning that we're not investing particularly in patient solutions when actually there are a lot of them that already exist. And is there a way to partner with some of these players as opposed to creating something from scratch and expecting users to start using some of these solutions that we would build? So just a thought on the previous comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to double click on that, I mean, when you think about healthcare in general, just strategically, this is a vertical which is predicated on human-to-human interaction, right? I mean, this is not other industries where we don't want to see less of humans, and our patients want physician time, they want pharmacist time, they want nurse time. Sometimes we want more sales rep and MSL time, but literally those are the critical moments. When I was practicing, this is the moment of truth, is that face-to-face. So as face-to-face, is falling, a little bit off the face of the earth, do we want to replace that with flat content, or do we want to try and replicate the power of the human conversation? We do, right? And that's the challenge for us, right? So, can we offset that loss of human face-to-face with something that is far more engaging and human-like for our users, right? So I think that's a really important part of this.
Yeah, I think, especially as we, sorry, I wanted to add on to that, to move to this world where, we're getting information on demand, and this has been driven by, platforms like Google, right? Which we type in one sentence and we get millions of results that we can look at that bring us to the right information that is most accurately sort of defining what we're looking for. I think in the same way, I think healthcare and pharma has a responsibility to start to move to that world where we're starting to be able to provide the information to the stakeholders who are looking for that information in a way that they can get it when they need it and wherever they are in the format that they're looking for it in.
Absolutely.
Next question. It's obvious that we lived until recently in the push era, right? So all our efforts have been more or less pushy towards the stakeholders and customers. And we definitely see a revelation or rethinking into going much more to pull channels, right? So Sophie, where do you see the biggest potential for conversational interfaces in terms of HCP conversation, patient engagement, customer engagement, etc.?
Yeah, and maybe there I would focus here on patients, since the poll results were actually driving towards that patient engagement more, and then we can dwell on the rest as needed. But again, so coming to the point brought up earlier, there is adoption, and we're seeing actually these, chatbots, conversational AI getting traction as symptom checkers, as triage mechanisms. We're seeing actually healthcare authorities using that, right? The NHS in the UK made a couple of interesting moves, building Alexa skills to deploy some of the content that they have on their websites using voice. We've seen them partner with UK startup Babylon also to do, AI digital-driven triage. And it's always about getting the patient into the right next course of action. So, and this can range from actually self-help all the way into visiting a GP, having a virtual consultation, or actually going to A&E. So we saw with the pandemic, of course, a couple more examples, the CDC in the US partnering with Microsoft on the bot Clara. So again, we're seeing quite a lot of this type of solutions getting in the hands of people and into channels that they already use. Spanish health authorities used WhatsApp to create a bot also around COVID. So the pandemic is showing us increasingly that, again, it's not about creating that new channel. It's about meeting people and consumers and users where they are in the channels that they currently use. So with that picture in mind, I think, again, pharma usually the traditional approach is let's create our own. I think that there is merit here in actually using some of these channels for things like disease awareness, of course, in a compliant way, but making sure that the message is arriving to the user. I think if you take this to the next level, we're seeing in some therapy areas, it's not broad yet, but in some therapy areas, some of these symptom checkers or bots actually move into more of a personal health companion. So, you know, a bot that will ask you how you're feeling about your symptoms and register that and pick up on signals in the answers that you're providing and giving you advice on what to do next. We're seeing that in chronic diseases like LARC in the US. We're seeing that in mental health quite a lot recently, I think also amplified by the pandemic. So here, I think the power and the potential is in this remote monitoring potential on a continuous basis. What will make it even more powerful if it's linked up with EMRs, with a broader holistic view of what the patient situation is and their context, and linked to the physician ultimately, so that, you know, if we can predict that something will happen based on all the information that the bot is getting, then intervene in a timely manner. So I think these are some of the, you know, potential evolutions of these solutions. Some of the, I would say some of the bots are actually driving towards becoming this personal health companion, but they're still early days, I would say.
Yeah, Sophie, I think you bring up a good point, and certainly want to double click on one thing that you said, which is around triage. I think the simplistic base reason that you want to have a conversational AI or a bot is so that you go from having 1,000 people asking the same questions to having maybe 10% of those with really the questions that cannot be answered in a straightforward manner, to be elevated and triaged to the human that can then provide them with the right type of information, so that you're not bombarding your resources that are very resource intensive, very expensive, that can only operate for a certain amount of time with all these questions that are similar but could be answered in a very quick way. And so I think that the triage part of conversational AI is a really important aspect. And then what you brought up after that was really the AI part of conversational AI, which is, and as you start to train the bot, and as the bot starts to get more data over time to understand what are some of the key learnings it has and some data points that it can pull together to really help us understand what this patient is asking for, or whether there's a certain set of symptoms that lead to a certain potential disease or therapeutic area or treatment, then, you know, it starts to get smarter about identifying these and raising these up and elevating these in the triage manner to the right place to get that kind of help that the stakeholder needs. So I think, you know, there's multiple layers to it, but more importantly, I think to both Sophie and John's point, that the triage mechanism allows for the ability for us to really start to hone in on where the most important and valuable resources can really play a part to serve the customers, versus creating one resource that everybody goes to and then it's tapped out, and you've just not made it very efficient overall.
I think you've, to triple click on that, then the concept of triage can be, it's powerful, but it's also very frightening. I think we have to be clear that I don't think the role or the place for pharma is in a diagnostic, you know, kind of an environment. We're not looking to diagnose patients. That's, you know, there's a lot of triaging bots out there. Awesome, that's amazing. I think we want to take them, you know, along that journey in a different way. So to your point, you know, Shwen, when a user is putting a query into a bot, it is super important that the bot understand based, you know, it's going to have to match up to an intent. We understand what you are asking. This is the intent or the topic you're looking for. This is what we are going to do with you now. We are going to either, you know, engage in a conversation. We may provide you with a simple answer and a link to further content. We may assess that as a potential adverse event and manage it as such, or we may escalate to a human or allow you to do something else, right? So that ability is really important. I would say that, you know, that the nice thing is that we know that there is a very common, let's say, for example, 80% of queries that are coming in about a product or a condition. You know that from your call centers, from your research. Every single digital asset you build is essentially designed to respond to some kind of a question. Let's manage those through the bot. And as you said, what are the topics that we should escalate to a human, right? Let's define what those are. That's super important. Lastly, because we are talking about pull, I think we have to recognize that consumers and HCPs are completely different in that behavior, right? So doctors typically, when they interact with a bot, they know what they don't know. And so they don't want to be guided through some type of button-driven experience. They want the ability to open text, ask question, get answer, right? It's a very pragmatic, clinical, transactional experience. So open text is very important. That's their pull. Consumers are oftentimes, or patients don't know what they don't know. They're coming in, they're going to ask a singular question. And that is the massive opportunity for pharma now to guide them through their journey to the point where they are, going to physician and asking for a prescription, for example, in a commercial bot in the US. And so I think it's super important that we understand what pull means in those two different scenarios. So it's super exciting then now when you start looking at journey mapping, so that when consumer or patient asks this question, how do we extend that conversation and guide them through that journey? And that's where so oftentimes button-driven experiences can be incredibly powerful for a customer who doesn't know what they don't know. And so I think that's really important. So it's a concept of pull. And then once someone has asked the question, what can we then push to them that's highly contextual? I always give the analogy of, it's kind of like when you go and see your doctor and you ask a question of him, if he just gave you that answer and then shut down, that's kind of not what you're looking for, right? You want to be able to ask a question, the doctor's going to respond, the pharmacist will respond, the nurse will respond, and then they're going to come back and they're going to clarify, right? Or they're going to talk about the next topic that's relevant, right? They're going to continue that conversation on. That's ultimately one of the advantages and key powers of conversational AI, is the ability to extend that conversation where you need to take them.
Thank you, John.
And I think, John, to add to that, the other part of this from a pull standpoint is when we use human resources to staff custom support lines, for example, we often we don't have a 24/7 support line. We often only staff them during the hours where what's a normal work hour, which is usually the time where either patients or healthcare professionals are also working. And so what happens after hours is where something like a bot can really be advantageous in providing the information they need on demand outside of those hours, and then only for the most important questions that can't be answered by the bot can be triaged to a human to respond the following day.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Shane. Let's move forward and talk about data, the easy part, right? Because Pharma's conversational transformation is for sure very data rich. Dr. John, can you tell us maybe what are the customer data telling us, and how this can shape our business strategy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the nature, as Sean was saying, is that, that because this is a 24, inbound channel in many ways, you're getting a massive set of queries coming in. The way we've designed, for example, our system, is we've identified, for a particular brand or for a particular condition, what are the, let's say, for example, 200 intents or topics that your customers are coming in to engage with you about. Now, every topic or every one of those intents, may have hundreds and hundreds of utterances, the way a user will ask a question to match up to that. But in the end, you have a taxonomy or a map that actually literally allows you to look at it as a heat map to see where it is, what are the topics that your customers are actually concerned about, and at what point in their journey is it relevant to them. So that's a really, kind of a really great insight to what do your customers really want. And I think in many cases, we think we might know what that is. But one of the things that's unique about conversational AI is that our customers don't look at it as a channel where they're going to, be embarrassed, or where there is stigma or judgment. And that actually is relevant both to the consumer and HCP side of things. But, in particular, let's look at a patient. There are lots of questions that patients will never ask of another human being, whether that be a friend, a colleague, or a physician. They just will never ask it. So although they know the bot feels like a human, they know it's not a human. So it reduces that hurdle to ask these very oftentimes simple questions or common questions, or what they would perceive as embarrassing questions, but are also really important questions that when answered will drive a patient to a successful outcome. And so I think it's a really good insight on what are those questions that we'll just never learn about from our patients because they're embarrassed to ask them. So I think that's really critical. Of course, when a customer is in a conversational experience with us, they are going through a flow, and there's so many nodes in these conversations, so that you're always learning about what's the next best conversation. If you provide them with 3 different options and they're choosing, you're learning a lot about how do you carry on a conversation with a customer to actually get them where you need them to go, right? That's really important. Or what is that, you know, and that's on the push side, right? So what's the next best action you're going to take with them? So I think that's really important. There's just tons and tons of data, and how you use that will be important. And of course, that data can also be shared not only with the marketing, but the sales side of the organization, right? If a physician is asking question X, are we capturing that? Are we sharing that with our sales force so that when they have their next interaction with that physician, that's part of their information and the what they've been forewarned with, so they can come in and actually value add that previous bought experience. I'll leave it at that. Pass over to the Sophie or Schwen. Do you want to add on to that?
Maybe one thing I would add on the patient side of things is what goes hand in hand with, to your point, the lack of judgment, and maybe why we're seeing quite a lot of these solutions in mental health is also privacy, and making sure that actually my data is not going to be used by someone, by, I don't know, the payer, the insurer, pharma companies, having that assurance that the data is encrypted and handled in the right way is something that is bubbling up a lot in the conversation, especially in the, for solutions that are patient facing.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Sophie. I think also, the way that bots are sort of structured and the way they ask the questions tends to be very similar to like a cognitive-based therapy type of approach, right? You can actually design it that way, and therefore for mental health, there's a direct tie-in and an obvious one that becomes a real opportunity for this healthcare world. But I think coming back to what we were talking about around the transformation of conversations, I think of actually outside of pharma, we have think about the airline world again. In the past, you used to call up customer service, and they used to have again the choices by numbers, right? And we used to like for help press 1, for this press 2, for that press 3, and we used to just want to get to 0 as quickly as possible so we can get the agent. Then we evolved, and then we got basically being able to speak the number. So you just say 1 or 2. Now we're in a place where you just have natural conversations, and they ask you, what are you looking for? Please tell us your name. What is your membership number? And it can answer you. And so I think in the same way, we're starting to evolve our conversational transformation, for lack of a better term, into a world where we're starting to become much more natural in the way that we understand what people are looking for and be able to provide them the right type of information based on those questions, based on what they're seeking out. And so I think that's important as a transformation. And then to John's point around the data, I think, what's really interesting is not only by collecting data for what people are looking for and how that feeds into the next action you want to follow up with them on, but there's also tools now where, let's say you're talking about voice bot, where they're starting to analyze voice and starting to pick up on digital biomarkers that are starting to then understand whether the person may have, it could predict whether the person has a certain disease or therapy, needs some kind of treatment. So we're moving to a world where that data is super rich, not only collecting things like, patient-reported outcomes, but also now, like I said, digital biomarkers, which are starting to predict diseases as well.
Schwen, let's move to the next question. Pharma's conversational transformation has begun, or has it? Well, actually, I would say that clearly there are many companies that have quickly moved to that era, as already mentioned at the very beginning of this keynote. What advice would you give for those who are watching today and who would like to initiate the conversational solutions within their companies? Maybe Schwen can give insight about that, because Schwen definitely pioneered conversational AI in many, many ways in many different companies, right, Schwen?
Yeah, thank you, Dario. And I think John will know exactly what I'm going to say here, but start with what you already have is probably going to be my piece of advice here. And that is really, we live in a world which is highly regulated. So we already have a lot of parts of the business which has a ton of pre-approved content. And that is usually the basis of a conversational AI, is to start to understand what those pieces of content are that you actually want to be the underlying structure and data for the conversational AI. The other thing is we also live in a world where we're driven by decision trees, and the combination of decision trees and pre-approved content is essentially how a bot works. Is depending on what the question is, depending on what the answers are, it drives you to the right piece of content, and you're going to have to train the bot that way anyway. So we already have places like patient support programs, medical information. All those places have lots of both of these things, decision trees and pre-approved content. So start there. You've already got what you need to build a conversational AI around it. And then from there, it's just understanding how the platform works and how to train it in a way that it's going to provide the right type of answers to the right type of questions and context.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to give a comment on that? Sophie, I see you.
I will be quick, Dario, but what I would say is also being open-minded to iterating, because the beauty in these solutions is also that you're capturing, to John's point earlier, a lot of data. So you can improve, you can make sure that it's tied up with the rest of your channels, and just keep an open ear and open mind, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Sophie and Xuan, you can maybe jump in on this. I think I would say that, although we are seeing some early adoption of conversational AI, it's like every horizon of digital. It's there's kind of that initial phase where there's a lot of reticence to kind of jump into this. I think that it's been a bit faster than the earlier horizons, largely because it has an AI component. Pharma feels somewhat intrigued by AI, but I don't think we've seen anywhere near the kind of acceleration we're not going to see over the next few months and years, as we feel far more comfortable. As Xuan said, there's some core hurdles that I think a lot of decision makers may think of. As Xuan said, let's not be concerned about the creation of new content to support the conversations. It's there. Those investments have been made. Let's leverage that great content and turn it into a conversational experience, which can be far more powerful. I think the other common thing we always hear is, how do we manage AEs? Well, the algorithms, we have multiple algorithm models now that can detect AEPC and then manage that appropriately. That's been done. We're in a place where let's say, for example, the NLU models that are in place for healthcare are fairly mature now. So there is a high level of accuracy and understanding. The integrations with your other systems, whether it be, Viva, Salesforce, IQVIA, these are in place. So there's a lot of the kind of the core building blocks, hurdles no longer exist, right? The core things are there. So I think that the risk of getting involved now is literally a lot lower now. And then on the cost side, I don't think Xuan or Sophie, you would say that cost is a huge issue here, especially as the kind of the more simple consumer patient bots are not hugely expensive as compared to, say, for example, an enterprise MI solution that's going to be global in nature.
Yeah, certainly, John. With the cost topic, I think with what we said at the beginning too is if you actually set this up the right way, could you actually be avoiding higher cost by providing a more efficient, optimized triage system, so that your high value, high cost resources are only being tapped into for the most important questions that can't be answered by a bot, for example.
Xuan, just a question for you and for Sophie. I mean, we're going to see inevitably a downsizing now of Salesforce. It's happening in certain markets, and so I think in some markets it's 10, 20% of Salesforce is going. Do you see that the movement of those dollars from that human over to the virtual size? Because I mean, certainly, when you look at the cost of a single individual, it doesn't take too many human replacements to power a fairly or a massively sophisticated conversational platform.
Sophie, go ahead if you have anything to add.
My area of expertise is more on the end consumer side, so I will let you, Xuan, comment on this one.
Okay, sure. Sorry. I personally, I'm not sure is the answer, because I think there's still an expectation that we may revert to a world where we might go back to being somewhat normal again. So I haven't personally seen in many places how that impact is really changing the way that companies restructure their investments. I think, though, that there's definitely a retraining of the sales force of how to leverage digital tools most efficiently, and the types of tools that they're starting to be given to actually do their jobs better. So I think that's definitely happening. I think an example I had was I was talking to the guys at Viva, for example, and before COVID hit, I think they only had like 10% of adoption of Engage among their customers. And then suddenly when COVID hit, it went skyrocketed to like 90% or something, right? So you can start to see that these engagement platforms and these ways of working are changing. And there's definitely a shift towards that kind of a platform and the ability to engage in a different way. But in terms of, how those investments are going to be shifting, I think what you're suggesting sounds intuitive, but I'm not sure that we're there yet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because do you know some concrete cases? You don't need to name the companies, but do you know some concrete cases in terms of reduction of field force? Does anybody know?
Absolutely. So let's be clear, there are a lot of pharma companies that are making that step to reduce headcount on the sales side, right? It's just, you can't carry a sales force when they're having, in many markets, say, for example, 10% face-to-face, maybe 40% of previous interactions are, on phone or through a telehealth type or a teleconferencing type model, but 50% of physicians are no longer interacting with a sales force rep that they used to. So, that's why I brought up that point. I think we all would love to come back to a normal world. It will happen, but I do believe that users are finding themselves to be incredibly comfortable and actually prefer many of the digital channels that they're working with. Physicians, Shwen, to your point, if we kept evolving as we were, I think physicians would have had a difficult time moving to a telehealth model. Now that they've been exposed to it, in many cases, they absolutely love it. Right. And so it's not just compressing 5 years of digital into a shorter period. It's actually exposing customers to new digital channels that actually make them far more efficient, far more effective in their work. And I think that we need to recognize that and actually realize that that is going to be the future. We're not going to replace all sales reps. That's not what we want to do. There is an absolute time and a place for that interaction. So it is incredibly powerful. But we also have to recognize the limitations that we're going to have in the future and what's the right channel for that right moment and that physician experience. I always bring it back. I hate to continue talking about when I was practicing, the odds that there would be a sales rep, in my office at that moment when I needed them was about 0.03%, right? Conversational channels allow that sales rep or that MSL to be with me at that absolute moment of need. And that's literally when pharma escalates or comes up to be a true colleague in the practice of medicine. So it's an opportunity for us, not an unfortunate scenario. I think it's a massive opportunity to play a different role in the healthcare ecosystem.
Thank you, John.
John, I'm really impressed that you calculated that with statistical significance.
I was being generous on that one anyway. Okay.
Since we have only 11 minutes left, I would like to proceed with a second pool question, which I will launch right now. And the question is, what do you see as being the greatest obstacle for pharma to fully adopt and leverage conversational AI? Once again, interesting question, quite curious to see the answers. And 1 minute time in total. Okay, I see 1% responded. Okay, let's see. This will be interesting as well, but I think the winner is more or less clear, right? Okay, let's wait for another 15 seconds. So 40% voted. And 5 more seconds and I will close the pool. Okay. I would say the results are obvious. Who would like to give a comment on that?
Shwen? Sophie?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump on first. I think it's interesting to see this. I thought that we'd see a lot more, a lot higher responses for lack of ROI, because I think that's an area that not many people have developed true models that to really show the value of the returns yet, at least not that I've seen publicly displayed in any form or fashion. But I guess, the two that have reached the highest response rates here make sense as well, because I think like anything new in terms of technology platforms in pharma and healthcare, AEs and compliance is always going to be one that's very top of mind, and something that, especially in a new platform where it's not being thought through in terms of how it's actually going to be set up in a general way, that's always going to be something that's going to be a concern. And if especially legal, regulatory, and medical are reviewing these platforms and they're not familiar with it, or they don't understand how it's actually going to be doing things, then it becomes something that will, each company has to figure out how to do in order to move past that to get it deployed. Internal knowledge, I think, again, that's another one that I think is interesting. Certainly, I'm sure a lot of pharma companies that are working with agencies and other vendors will have a lot of opportunities and be presented with these types of solutions to solve many things. So I think the lack of knowledge internally speaks to what I was saying about compliance, but also the fact of how do they respond to the value of some of these solutions that are being presented to them from their vendors, from their agencies, and so on. Maybe it's another driving force for why this is very high as well.
Yeah, I would agree on what you said, Shwen. I think that the two, compliance and lack of internal knowledge, move together very much hand in hand. I feel, though, that with, again, public health authorities making moves in this space and more examples of successful adoption across the industry, this will help, one, give that precedent, maybe to the point of it may be too early and we don't know it well enough. But also open minds, right, about what this could be. I think it resonates with me because in a lot of instances, people, think of AI and associate it with a black box. We don't really know how it's generating the answers, and we need to make sure that, it's not going to expose either the company or even, give point people in the wrong direction. So there's a lot of discussion around how accurate some of these bots are, again, especially around the patient-facing solutions and how that will translate on their overall journey.
Yeah, just I would, I think Dario, an event like this obviously brings that number down from 36 probably down to 32% now, right? So these are the internal kind of, or the educational events that I think bring up that conversational AI IQ. One of the things we do see is that typically once we initiate a project somewhere in the world with one of our clients, we tend to do these kind of like lunch and learn events or internal education so that we can bring that kind of IQ up within the organization. And then Sophie, to your point, part of that is really the educational education around AE and PC detection, right? So, does the NLU model allow you to understand those, when a true adverse event or an adverse event is potentially being asked, and then how do you manage that? And there's lots of different, models for management. Every pharma company, I think, has a different waterline or threshold of how they want to manage it. But to your point, the fact that there are, 30 pharma companies out there now building conversational solutions and have overcome that means that I think that, essentially those hurdles have been overcome. I think one of the things I would say is that in almost all of our projects, there is someone within the pharma company, oftentimes many, who have a true passion for innovation in this conversational AI world, and finding those individuals, that have that deep understanding is really critical to getting those first projects, going. And then to Sophie's point about those ROI metrics, it's important that you set up front what are the KPIs of success of these initial bot projects. But super excited to see that cost is not, or Salesforce is not an issue. That's a bit surprising for me. So good to see that.
Thank you on the comments. Let's move forward to the next questions. Actually, we have 2 remaining questions and only 5 minutes time. So I encourage you to be quick and sharp, and bold, right? So next question, what conversational solution should be part of every plan for next year? Because it's budgeting time, right? And I believe that many of the pharma companies are thinking about to start in that water and field of conversational AI. Who would like to start?
Shwen.
I will go because I think I will be more general. I will say, Dario, usually the way I like to think about this is what's the problem we're trying to solve for? What's the challenge and what's the right technology or capability to address it? We've heard today and we've seen that conversational AI can help with lack of capacity when it's limited, in giving, shortening the response time, in automating some of the repetitive tasks, in reaching more broad audiences across healthcare physicians and consumers. So I would really urge to think about, what it is we're trying to solve for. There are many areas where conversational AI can come in. But yes, I would focus on what it is I'm solving for, what will success look like, and take it from there.
Yeah, Sophie, I should have gone first because you said exactly what I was going to say, which is start with the problem first, right? I'm glad we all agree on that. And I think that's exactly it. It's really, it takes, rather than coming with a solution first, start with understanding what are the insights that are driving you towards this as a potential solution for the problem or the pain point that you're trying to solve for. So is it around trying to make things more efficient, and be able to provide 24/7 support in a world where right now we only have a limited amount of resources to deploy to that? Is it something where we're trying to find the right type of patients, and this will help us get triage and narrow down the right type of patients that we can then start to engage for something that we want to target them on? So it really depends on the problem that you have, or what is the pain points that you're trying to solve for. And the more you can solve for that pain point, the more value you're going to create for the end user, and then you're going to know where the value of your platform as well.
Just super quick then, I think, Dario, one of the things we're seeing is that many of our clients are not thinking of conversational AI as a one-year plan tactic. It is a new capability for the entire enterprise, and they're oftentimes looking at this as a 5-year plan of where do we start and what do we test and where do we go. I think every business unit, as we saw in those early slides, has an opportunity to leverage conversational AI in the near future. So, I mean, literally, how do we take your existing brand site, if you're a marketer, and make it far more compelling and powerful at moving customers, to where you want them to go in that digital property to do the actions that you want? If you're a Med Affairs or Med Info group, how do you start to automate that business, right? How do you reduce headcount and yet drive more engagements with physicians on terms that are more relevant and practical to them? And of course, we've talked a lot about sales. If you're involved at the sales side of the business, we do have an immediate issue that can be managed or addressed. And so how do you look at building virtual sales rep solutions that either replace in some certain products where there may be no Salesforce right now, or how do we complement existing Salesforce on important brands, right? So that they can so that you can achieve those targets. Last but not least, to Sophie's point on the patient side, patient support programs, right? Those are once again very expensive. So if you have a patient support program, how can you look at trying to automate some certain parts of that, so reduce headcount or extend PSPs to a much broader set of brands within the organization? So every BU, I think, has an opportunity to dip their toes now and start along that journey.
Thank you, John. And last question, let's outlook 3 years ahead, and what do you see as the norm when it comes to pharmacy engagement models with the customers or other stakeholders?
John, why don't you start, since you started talking about the 5-year plan?
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would simply harken back to, so we've all been there. We've been on the previous journey, yeah. Can you hear me?
Please. Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. So literally, I think it's literally like we were in the web world. I would say every brand now, every business unit has a digital, website. Many have apps. I think we're going to see that kind of ubiquitous leverage of conversational AI. And so every existing digital touchpoint in 3 years, I think, is going to be augmented or amplified by a conversational component. And of course, we will also initiate and build new conversational touchpoints, voice, IVR leveraging, that will be completely conversational in nature. That said, technology is advancing very quickly in this space. So the accuracy of bots, the UI, the UX is becoming far richer, far more compelling. So what we're going to see in 3 years is an experience which is, is going to be unlike what we're seeing now, as we really start to apply brain power to figuring out how do customers really want to engage through this new model.
Thank you.
Sophie?
Yes, I mean, what I would say is we've heard a lot that digital will be the front door to health. I think we're starting to see this happen firsthand, actually, with the pandemic. So I would, see some of these conversational solutions be the initial point into the system. I think increasingly what I would like to see is that they're, again, part of a broader solution and value proposition, and that there are smooth transitions between these solutions across whether it be the patient journey or the clinical workflow, because currently a lot of what we're seeing is point solutions. I would like to see something a little bit more coherent as a whole.
Great. Yeah, I think, ultimately where we're going, and by the way, I have a real big passion for, conversational AI and I believe that this is a lot of it is going to drive the future of healthcare engagement. But more than that, I think, I think conversational AI is probably going to be a really easy, seamless entry point for many of our customers, whether it's patients, caregivers, or healthcare professionals. I think they're going to be seamlessly integrated into many of the platforms that they're already using. So whether it's a social channel or text messaging or something else, like the bots are going to be seamlessly integrated in that, in the same way that for apps to truly be ubiquitous and for everybody to start using it, we started having iOS and Android stores where we could download it from. It's going to be much easier to engage with bots. It's not you have to go and find it, they'll be where you are. And then in the back end, I think what you're going to start to find is all the different bots that we have, all that data is going to have to be collected and aggregated and made sense of in the back end when you start to pull those together, much to what Sophie just said. And then that data, I think, can be leveraged across the entire life cycle of the drug and the product. And so that, everything from R&D looking at sort of digital biomarkers to global drug development, using it for patient-reported outcomes and maybe even patient recruitment for clinical trials, to then product support in the commercial space. And then also, I think, Sophie, you brought up the example earlier about supply chain and manufacturing having remote process automation and so on, and driving, some of these responses for inventory and so on. I think throughout the life cycle of a product, you're going to start to see applications of this data, but it can only happen if this data is also brought together and structured in a way that could be interpreted and made sense of holistically.
Thank you, Sven. With that thought, I would like to close this very interesting session. I believe it was very insightful with a lot of fresh and up-to-date information. Please join us for other remaining sessions, actually 6 in total, from tomorrow till Friday. All of the sessions will be also published on our YouTube channel. Sophie, John, Sven, thank you very much once again for joining us, and I really hope we can engage in some further initiatives from us as well. Take care and stay negative in COVID, but positive in mind, right?
Thanks, Dario.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Here, bye.